Hi, I'm Tim from International Lawyers for West Papua. Today, alongside the delegation from the ILWP, we told the Dutch Parliament about their responsibility regarding West Papua. We spoke about the international legal status of West Papua. It is a case of unfinished decolonization and an occupied territory. We asked the Dutch parliamentarians to work with their colleagues in Europe and to look at the negotiations that are ongoing for a free trade agreement between Indonesia and the EU. That free trade agreement cannot go ahead in the current form. They need to look at the impact that such an agreement will have on the rights of West Papuans, and all businesses operating in West Papua should ensure that they have the free, prior, informed consent of the people of West Papua. Thanks.
Mr. Hansen, any comments from a legal perspective? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Durun and fellow honourable members. Thank you, Interim President Benny Wenda. I'm here to speak hopefully briefly on behalf of International Lawyers for West Papua. We are a network of lawyers around the world who provide advice to the ILWP and to the Free West Papua movement. We have members here in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Indonesia, in Australia, Ghana, Nigeria. And the reason why we have that support from across the world, including prominent jurists, former judges, human rights solicitors, the reason why we have that support is that the international law situation in West Papua is very clear, and it's very horrific, and it's quite blatant. So under international law, West Papua is a case of incomplete decolonization and a case of occupation. And it is also a place of ongoing human rights violations. Very briefly in terms of why that is the case. So a treaty between the Netherlands and Indonesia was noted by the UN in 1962. A pretend referendum of barely over 1,000 people, again, was noted by the UN in 1969. And the reality is that West Papua has never exercised their international law, their legal right to self-determination, to exercise their right to self-determination. And what happened in the 1960s was a violation of the sacred trust and obligation under Article 73 of the UN Charter. It was a breach of Indonesia's treaty obligations under the Charter and of the 1962 treaty that's known as the New York Agreement. Recognizing that historic decolonization of West Papua is incomplete, under international law, West Papua should be a matter for the UN Decolonization Committee. Alternatively, or simultaneously, the UN General Assembly should ask the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion about the situation in West Papua. That big picture is important, but there are also smaller steps that can be taken today to improve the lives of people in West Papua. A visit by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is long overdue. The delays mentioned by Mr. Alex Sobel are highly unusual. This is not something that is seen often at all. It puts Indonesia in very, I think, uncomfortable company. And it's also worth noting that over 115 states have standing invitations, not just to the High Commissioner, but to the UN Special Procedures. Indonesia is not one of those. So, as Mr. Alex Sobel mentioned, please speak to your representative at the United Nations and ask them to engage with their counterparts in Indonesia and with the Office of the High Commissioner regarding the planned visit to West Papua. Last year, as Interim President Benny Wender has mentioned, the ULMWP Provisional Government launched their Green State Vision at COP26, pledging to take decisive action to address the climate emergency. This vision includes making ecocide a criminal offence and restoring guardianship of natural resources to Indigenous groups. This vision needs to be contrasted with the current devastating levels of environmental destruction in West Papua. Since 2001, millions of euros have been sent by the EU for Indonesian use in West Papua, as mentioned earlier. This needs to be viewed in the context of the ongoing negotiations for a free trade agreement between the EU and Indonesia. In 2019, the EU arranged a sustainability impact assessment as part of those trade negotiations. The assessment, which is hundreds of pages long, failed to identify the conflict in West Papua as a concern. How is that possible? So there's an armed conflict, thousands of people on the street protesting, extrajudicial killings, UN reports, NGO reports, the EU itself expressing concern. The assessment completely missed this. The assessment needs to be repeated. Perhaps more importantly, some elements of a free trade agreement between EU and Indonesia could be illegal. In September last year, the General Court of the EU ruled that self-determination and consent of the people were relevant factors to legality in an EU trade agreement with Morocco, citing concerns over Western Sahara. On a similar note, organisations based in the Netherlands should be reviewing any operations or investments in West Papua, ensuring that there is free, prior and informed consent from the local population. Any robust due diligence process will surely identify that operating in West Papua is not possible without contributing to a violent military occupation and without overriding the wishes of West Papuans. So our request in relation to that is to please work with your counterparts across the EU to pause or cancel the free trade agreement negotiations and to revisit the impact assessment in a more realistic light. Finally, representatives from the Netherlands will have an opportunity to ask Indonesian representatives questions and to make recommendations regarding their human rights records in West Papua during the upcoming fourth round Universal Periodic Review at the UN in November. Recommendations to Indonesia can be made by other states. They should include engaging with the ULMWP to find a peaceful resolution to the situation in West Papua, allowing the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit West Papua, and ensuring that that visit is open, transparent, and includes unsupervised discussions with West Papuan representatives and human rights defenders. And those recommendations should also include allowing humanitarian and monitoring groups to visit and perhaps withdrawing troops from West Papua. Please encourage your representatives to make such recommendations later this year. Thank you.